During the emergency approach to Vienna, the fuel on board the Airbus A310 became critically low. Shortly after, both engines flamed out, but the aircraft was still 12 nautical miles from the runway, and although the first officer was able to restart one of them for a few more minutes, the aircraft hit the grass just before the runway. This is the story of the Hapag Lloyd Flight 3378 and how a negligent pilot decision almost killed 151 people. 12th August 2000 was another hot summer day in the high holiday season. Just after 10 in the morning, 143 passengers and 8 crew, which were almost exclusively people returning from holidays at the biggest Greek island of Crete, boarded the Airbus A310 belonging to the German leisure airline Hapag Lloyd. The aircraft involved was an Airbus A310-304, equipped with 2 General Electric CF6 engines, which was delivered new to Hapag Lloyd Flight in early 1990. At 10:59, the aircraft took off from Chania, the second biggest airport in Crete, heading to Hanover in northwestern Germany. The crew consisted of Captain Wolfgang Arminger, who was 56 years old at the time of the flight. He was the pilot in command, and the 25-year-old first officer, Thorsten Ruckrath, who was the pilot monitoring. Immediately after takeoff, problems started to arise. The pilots had found, after 4 attempts, that it was impossible to fully retract the landing gear, which was indicated by both the red gear unsafe lamp and the yellow gear door open lamp in the cockpit. Shortly after, the captain decided that the flight would continue towards Germany, as fuel must have been burned before landing in any case. There was, however, one major problem. With landing gear extended, the aircraft would consume a lot more fuel due to increased drag. It was thus impossible to reach Hanover without refueling on the way. Now, every flight crew would have decided to burn fuel and divert back to the origin airport, but the captain of the flight, Hapag Lloyd 3378, decided otherwise. After consultations with the flight dispatcher and doing some calculations in the FMS computer, the captain decided to divert to Munich in southern Germany. At this moment, he made the first significant mistake. The FMS was not designed to take into account the extra drag produced by the extended landing gear. In fact, it was impossible to reach Munich with this amount of fuel. This shortly became clear as fuel reserves were dropping unexpectedly fast. The captain reacted by diverting to Vienna. However, in reality, the amount of fuel left didn't allow to safely do that. At around noon local time, the first officer reported to the captain that they had already consumed half of their initial fuel load, although they had still been in the Greek airspace. A few minutes later, the FMS prediction of fuel dropped to the level requiring diversion to the nearest suitable airport, which was at the time Zagreb in Croatia. The crew, however, didn't react to this. Instead, they focused on arriving at runway in Vienna, which was the closest to the aircraft. At 12:53, they notified Vienna Air Traffic Control that if this runway wouldn't be available, they would prefer to divert to closer Graz. Shortly after, a low fuel level warning appeared in the cockpit. At this time, the aircraft was 42 nautical miles or 78 kilometers northeast of Zagreb, 85 nautical miles or 157 kilometers southeast of Graz, and 131 nautical miles or 243 kilometers from the Vienna airport runway. At 13:07, the captain finally declared an emergency due to lack of fuel, while still stating that he still expected to reach Vienna, as the diversion to Graz would require an airport approach chart, which they were missing. Many times during the flight, the first officer was telling to the captain that FMS data were incorrect due to the extended landing gear. However, the captain still believed the computer data. He even instructed the first officer to request no emergency services for after landing and to defer deployment of the flaps, especially if the engines flamed out. Finally, at 13:26 local time, both engines flamed out. And even though the first officer was able to restart one of them for a few more minutes of thrust, it became apparent that the Airbus A310 wouldn't reach the airport safely. The left wing tip hit the grass about 660 meters short of the runway, followed by the left landing gear, which shortly collapsed. The panic immediately erupted on board. The aircraft skidded on the left engine and the right main landing gear over the approach lights, turning 90 degrees to the left. It has finally come to rest off the runway near the taxiway. There was no fire as the fuel tanks were empty. This resulted in a safe evacuation of all 151 people on board within the required time period. Nobody lost their life or got seriously injured. The aircraft was written off due to the severe damage to the underside of the fuselage. It was the sixth hull loss of an Airbus A310. Shortly after the investigation started, the final report on the investigation of the incident was published almost 6 years later on the 21st of March 2006. The report identified the cause of the failure of landing gear retraction as a minor oversight during maintenance. An inadequately secured lock nut allowed a screw to gradually turn, finally preventing the landing gear from fully retracting. The crash wouldn't have, however, happened if the captain reacted properly to this situation. The crew failed to comply with company regulations regarding fuel reserves and also determined them exclusively using the FMS, which was of course incorrect due to the lack of data on the extended landing gear. The direct result of the crash was the captain's failure to divert to nearby Zagreb airport upon receiving the low fuel level warning. The report also charged Airbus with inadequate and misleading documentation for this specific case, particularly about the restriction of FMS and Hapag Lloyd Airline for the inadequate documentation for abnormal landing gear up indication of the abnormal checklist and the lack of review of the fuel needs by the operations division. The investigators have also made 14 recommendations for improvements in systems, documents, and procedures to avoid such problems in the future. In addition, Hapag Lloyd reported that Captain Wolfgang Arminger voluntarily left the airline 6 months after the incident. In 2004, a Hanover district court convicted Captain Arminger of dangerous interference in the air traffic, saying he was endangering others' lives mainly by failing to divert to Zagreb, and gave him a 6-month suspended prison sentence. In conclusion, this crash occurred, as always, due to many factors. The most important one was the failure of the landing gear retraction, as this started a chain of events leading to a crash, which, however, wouldn't have happened if the captain acted in a professional manner. Flight 3378 can be deemed as a miracle because everyone on board survived, even though the aircraft engines flamed out 12 nautical miles before the runway, and it could have happened much earlier if there was only a slight change in, for example, weather conditions such as wind speed or direction. The accident highlights the importance of proper crew training and crew resource management in general, as the first officer reminded the captain multiple times that the FMC provides incorrect data. He, however, ignored him, most probably due to the fact that he was much younger and inexperienced in the captain's view. Thanks for watching. Please support and subscribe to my channel.